Hi, my name's Mark, one of the pastors at Trillium. I think one of the hardest places one can find oneself in life is when our basic way of seeing the world, our kind of ground level philosophy, our way of understanding, making sense of things, when that frame doesn't work for us anymore. And this happens to us at times in life. We come to moments of trial or difficulty, and then all of a sudden our lives don't work so well anymore because we can't make sense of them the way we used to be able to. This happened to the Apostle Paul. He was, as a young man, a Pharisee, committed to following the laws as laid out in the Old Testament. And he was zealous for the law, so much so that when this new understanding of Judaism came on the scene, one built around Messiah Jesus, he made it his life purpose to persecute it, to stamp it out. And finally, he got a writ from the temple authorities to go to another city, Damascus, to do the same thing there that he'd been doing in Jerusalem. And on the way, on the journey from Jerusalem to Damascus, he's overwhelmed by this brilliant white light. Drives him to his knees. He hears a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He cries out, "Who are you, Lord?" And he hears what seems to be impossible. "It is I, Jesus." And in that moment, Paul's frame, his way of understanding life, his way of interpreting his life is shattered. In fact, the book of Acts says he's blinded. And I think that's quite literal, but I also think it's a metaphor to say that he lost his way of seeing, his basic frame on life. God does not protect us from those moments. God does not intervene to stop those moments from happening to us. It's an essential part of our journey to spiritual growth. And it can cut both ways, for sure. It can lead us into faith, it can lead us out of faith, but it's an essential part of what life is about. Paul had to come to a new understanding and to build a new frame for himself. Eventually, he was given the task of carrying the gospel of love out into the world, into that Gentile world. And one might have thought this Gentile world, which was thirsty and hungry for spiritual truth, would have welcomed what Paul had to say. But in fact, he found the slog out there difficult. It was a slog. You see, people don't like their worldviews challenged. No one likes the way we interpret our lives as being challenged by others. We're very defensive about it. And he found that out in the world. So much so, the resistance was so strong that he had to give the mission back to God. God, this is your mission, not mine. He had to hand it over to God. And he said that was the best thing he could have ever done. By giving it back to God, it was now God's grace and God's power that was working through him in the moment. It required Paul to have a new shift in understanding, a worldview shift. The second one, perhaps as large as the first. He came to understand that it was only by God's grace and goodness that he would be able to accomplish the task he had been set. He came to understand that the power that had raised Jesus from the dead was also the same power that was at work in his lives. You see, it's very tempting for us to think that God has two powers: the power that raised Jesus from the dead and the power that is at work in our own life circumstances. And they're of different magnitudes or orders. But Paul said, no, it's the same power. The power that raised Jesus from the dead was the same power that was walking with him. And not only with him, but the same power that could be walking with us. It require a bit of a change of frame of reference for us to understand this, though. Paul learned that not to let past defeats impact one's next step. The defeats aren't even necessarily defeats if we learn the right lesson from them. They certainly have no ability to impact the present or the future unless we give it that power. Paul learned that he was to be more than just an instrument of God's grace and glory. He was to be the embodiment of it and to teach people through his own example how to move through hard places, just the same way Jesus did. We're all going to come to places of disillusionment and despair. I guess the question is, what are we going to do with them? How are we going to make sense of them? What are we going to learn from them? The call of Paul's example is not to let the moments of despair teach us the wrong lesson. The right lesson, he says, is to understand that the power that raised Jesus from the dead, which was the same power that walked with him and got him through the hard circumstances, is the power that walks with you and me in all of life's circumstances.